My name's Hannah, I'm a product evangelist at Satchel, and I'm going to be your host today. So, in this session, we are going to be exploring the impact that school closures have had on our students, and how we as EdTech leaders and teachers can help with this. We're going to be giving some of our insights into catch-up learning and how Satchel One can be used to support schools. We're also going to be hearing from some of our guests. They're going to be sharing their thoughts on how we can help students to catch up and reverse the impact that school closures have had on our students. So, we've got all of that to look forward to later, but right now, let's have a look at what we've got on the agenda. So, today we've got Darren Simons from Quizlet, who's going to speak a little bit about instant feedback and how quizzes might help us bridge the attainment gap. We're also going to be chatting to Peter Burgess of GCSE Pod about the rise of the micro lesson and whether they are the key to catch-up learning. After that, David Kavanagh from Ashton-on-Mersey School will walk us through their experience of catch-up learning and teaching during the pandemic. And finally, we'll be speaking to Louise Raw about Satchel classes and the importance of accessible education for underprivileged students during uncertain times. So, all of that to look forward to. But before we get into things, let's take a closer look at today's subject, catch-up learning. Time off school affects all students differently, and with so much disruption this year, some have fallen further behind than others through no fault of their own. In fact, it's estimated by the EEF that school closures may have undone a decade of progress on reducing attainment gaps between the highest and the lowest achievers. This affects all students, but it will likely hit the most disadvantaged and vulnerable the hardest. If we want a fair education system, one with equal opportunities for students from all different backgrounds, we need to close these attainment gaps. But with teachers' workloads at an all-time high, we also need to find tried and tested techniques that will effectively support catch-up learning without being an additional strain on their day-to-day schedule. As schools returned, the government announced an extra £1 billion in funding for catch-up learning. This includes in-school catch-up tutoring as part of the National Tutoring Programme. However, whilst this funding might seem substantial, it actually works out at around £80 more per pupil. This funding is unlikely to help maintain the prolonged period of quality catch-up learning that's really needed to bridge the gap. When you consider the £4,800 base funding that schools are given for each student, the figure becomes even more questionable. What schools need right now is a solution to the divide that we're seeing in classrooms across the country, and it's not going to happen overnight. We need thoughtful techniques to get students back on track and achieving their full potential. And that is where today's speakers come in. Each of today's speakers has unique insight into how students and teachers interact with EdTech and what we can all do to help bridge the attainment gap. We want you to leave this webinar today with proper, actionable techniques and strategies that you can apply to your classroom and your school. So before we hear from our guests, we're going to share some techniques of our own. Possibly the most crucial step in catch-up learning is identifying either the topic the class is struggling with or the students who are falling behind. A good way to identify these gaps is through regular quizzing. The responses you get should give you a good idea of how much students know about the topic. The results should show if any individual students have gaps in their knowledge and need extra work. Any consistent incorrect answers can be covered by the class as a whole. There are an abundance of different tools that can support you in creating quizzes. In fact, I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about the power of quizzing from some of our speakers later in the programme. We also have a quizzing tool available in our learning platform, Satchel One. Just set a quiz and show my homework and it will mark itself and show you how your students did. You can either follow up immediately from the quiz using messaging in Satchel One, or you can commit to face-to-face time at school with the students that need that little bit more help. Another challenge that teachers are facing when it comes to catch-up learning is that students are at very different stages with their learning because some have fallen behind more than others. This makes it really difficult to deliver the same task or content to an entire class. In order for catch-up learning to be successful, teachers need to support students and cater tasks to their current ability. And one way of doing this is through differentiated homework. Adapting work for students working at different levels is crucial for bridging this gap, without holding higher achieving students back or overwhelming the lower achieving students. One way of doing this is to create a long assignment that can be broken down into separate tasks for different ability levels. Then you can tailor the homework assignment to each different student depending on where their knowledge gaps lie. However, this can be quite time consuming and becomes increasingly difficult the larger that your class size is, of course. Most teachers tend to set 2 or 3 different variations of the task and assign them in ability groups to keep things simple. We made sure that this can also be done on Satchel One, with the option to set different kinds of projects like differentiated homework or flexible tasks to suit each class's needs. As a portion of the DfE budget is dedicated to the National Tutoring Programme, this will be a valuable tool in our battle for attainment loss. But there isn't going to be funding for every student, and some students that would really benefit from additional support might not receive it. If this is the case, try and seek out alternatives like intervention lessons or online tutoring. Intervening and providing more support to those in need is crucial to getting our students back on track. Try buddying higher achieving students with the lower achieving students in intervention lessons. The higher achieving students will definitely benefit from explaining and consolidating their knowledge, and the lower achieving students might find it that bit easier speaking to their classmates and peers rather than approaching a teacher. This also makes larger intervention groups a bit more manageable for teachers. They get to take a step back from being the teacher and they get to take on more of a supportive role. Student morale is going to play a big role in the catch-up process. If your class feels deflated about the loss of progress, they won't be engaged and learning effectively. The very best way to counteract this is by actively encouraging students, rewarding them for their efforts and reminding them this is not just isolated to them, this is happening across the whole world. We recommend using a simple points-based system to motivate and reward students for their progress. We're big believers in the power of praise in learning. Positive reinforcement can improve teacher-student relationships, active engagement in lessons, and even overall attainment. Once your school sets up a points-based system, it's easy for teachers to add rewards, badges, and points to keep that learning momentum going. You could even go a step further and add physical or digital rewards to the mix too. Incentives like online gift vouchers ensure that your policy is taken seriously. And there is nothing that motivates students like a little friendly competition. There are so many different online systems that make this possible, like our Behaviour app, for example. The added benefit of having an online reward system means that you can continue recognising your students' efforts, even if you have to work remotely again. Finally, if you want to provide high-quality catch-up, you are going to need high-quality teaching materials that are accessible to your students. The school library might well be your first choice, but what happens if you have to self-isolate or if the school closes entirely? Having a reliable, well-stocked digital library could be a lifesaver during the current climate. Not only do you save the time that you would have spent searching through physical books, but there's also no need to scan or upload anything. It also means that you can make all course material available to students to read and absorb at their own pace. This approach is known as connectivism, and it's said to provide students with a better understanding of the course and more confidence to tackle the subjects in lessons. Online textbooks are becoming the norm nowadays. Our content app contains hundreds of quality assured curriculum-checked resources from Collins and makes them available to both students and teachers within Satchel One. By doing all of this, you should be putting in place a structure for your students that gives them the support, materials, and encouragement that they need to bridge the gap and catch up with their schoolwork. It shows that you want what's best for them and that you're putting in the extra work too. So, That's how we're tackling catch-up learning here at Satchel, but what about the rest of our guests? It's time to pass over to Darren Simons at Quizlet, who is going to take us through instant feedback quizzes and how they can help us bridge the attainment gap. Hello, Darren. Lovely to have you with us. Are you well?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Please do just start when you're ready.
Great, no problem. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen, just
Lovely.
1 second, and then we'll then get going.
Thanks, Darren.
That's all right. Great, so you've already kind of heard things around that, closing that learning gap and those different issues that we've seen around that particular learning gap. One of the other areas is actually thinking about the different approaches we're doing right now to learning. There's different ways of running a session. And that's due to the ongoing disruption that we've seen in education. And there's a number of ways that are coming about running this particular session. So we're lucky enough still to do some of those face-to-face sessions, but there might of course be that slight issue of being socially distanced. We might be teaching in a certain way or be limited in the interaction that we can have with some of our students. Another case, we're moving to 100% online. So the students aren't actually face-to-face with us, they're engaging with the whole concept online, and we're using video tools to be able to interact with them and teach them using the online manner. Another approach has been the hybrid approach. So we're doing some of the lessons which have been online and some of the sessions which are face-to-face, depending on the curriculum and maybe even the timetable itself. So we might be doing like 25% online with a 75% face-to-face kind of model. And finally, we're seeing that mixed approach where we've actually got some students who are online at the same time as them being face-to-face in the classroom. And you've got to try and manage that as a teacher of being able to teach the students who are face-to-face, but also giving that good online session for those students that can't be in the classroom face-to-face, but are joining us through the computer. So obviously we're going to see some difficulties there, and there's going to be difficulties with managing feedback to the students during that time. And it can be definitely more difficult if we're moving between those approaches. So if we're moving from an online environment to a face-to-face or kind of that mixed approach, there's going to be missed opportunities for giving timely feedback to the students, and we're going to miss those opportunities to be able to do that. And what I've seen in practice, I work in a college as a teaching development coordinator, and I've seen, we've seen students who are not face-to-face with their teachers or their peers. They become really unconfident with their learning, and they're just not sure what they're doing. And usually what would happen in the classroom, they'd be able to get that instant support. So they'd be able to ask the person right next to them going, do you know what this means? What does this mean? Or they'd be able to put their hand up or get the attention of the teacher, and you'd be able to go and support them. Also, the teacher is missing those signs. Certainly if you're online or you've got mixed approach, you're not going to notice that student struggling. Usually in a face-to-face session, you're looking around the room and you can almost spot who hasn't quite got it and where you need to go and support them straight away. And you're missing that on an online, certainly if we're not using webcams or if they're turned off or there's no engagement as much from a particular student, you can just miss those signs. And that student can really struggle and not get the feedback and the support they need. So if you kind of look at the sort of theory around it, and it's kind of really looking at how we can make formative feedback effective. And sort of due to the sort of feedback around it, it's got to be timely. So when a student's doing a piece of work, they need to get that feedback as soon as possible. Maybe there's a slight delay, but as quickly as possible, we can get that feedback to them and suggest improvements for them. It's also got to relate to the focus of that learning. So that learning intention, your learning outcome, whatever your aim is for that particular lesson, or maybe it's for the whole course. And it's got to identify for the student where success has happened. They're going to need to know what they've got right. So they've got that information. But it also should indicate where they need to improve and how they can improve and how that improvement can take place. It should also allow them time to improve. There should be an opportunity for them to try that again. If you've suggested some improvements, how can they do that? How can they make those improvements and giving them time to do that and try those things out? And it should be accessible to students in terms of the meaning or the vocabulary that's being used, and it should make sense for the student, that particular feedback that you're going for. So they're the things that we should be looking at for formative feedback. And obviously it's quite difficult right now with all the different strategies we have of trying to run those lessons. If we look at Dylan William, he kind of says the best feedback is clear, specific guidance on how to improve. So that's what we're looking at. How can we give that information to the students? They've got that guidance and they know where they're going to move forward with their learning. One tool that could help is Quizlet, and that can help with a range of different tools, but I'm going to just highlight one here, which is about spell. I really like spell because it gives instant feedback to the student about how they can improve, and it gives them then time to try that spelling out and try to do that again. I've got a couple of demonstrations here. The first demonstration is for an English kind of curriculum, and this is the point where I'm doing live typing, and I always spell wrong. So that's good for this example. It's going to give you that instant feedback around it. What we're going to see on here in Quizlet, we've got an opportunity to hear a word if I press the speaker, and I've got this definition here just to help me out. So I'm going to hear the word, and this saying imperative sentence that I need to spell. I can definitely not spell imperative sentence. So I'm just going to put something in here really, really quickly and press enter. It's going to tell me that it's incorrect. And now it's making suggestions about how I can actually improve that spelling. So I was pretty right. I almost got that right just by not trying to get it right. And now I get another chance to try that again. So I'm now going to try and remember while I'm speaking, which is the more difficult thing, of getting the right answer. And I'm going to press enter. It's going to tell me I got that right answer. It's then going to give me some feedback afterwards. So it's going to show me what my progress was. I didn't do so well on that time, but it's going to only give me one which I've learned right when I get it right first time. So I've got another chance now to try it again and see if I can learn those spellings. And it's now going to give me those opportunities to do those. The second example I've got here is for a different foreign language, so a modern foreign language. In this case, it's French. And you'll notice on this French text, if I press the speaker button, it's going to tell me, I can't even repronounce that, but it's going to be for tone, which is in French. And I've got now try and spell that particular word. And because I've got a UK keyboard here, it's giving me some suggestions of different letters that I'm going to be able to use in French, which I won't have very easily within my actual English keyboard. So it's going to help the student to do those. And I'm just going to type in le tone. I know that's going to be wrong, and it's now going to tell me what the correct answer is for those. I obviously managed to get the first one right. What it's also doing is telling me in my ear, it's reading out those letters as well. So if a student is struggling to be able to see those letters and understand what they are, they'll hear those as well. So it just helps them with that spelling, but it works out really well for English and also modern foreign languages. I clearly need to practice my French for those. But the other biggest issue can be implementing anything new within a classroom is time. Time is a big factor. We're sort of seeing it all the time. Where do we, that's almost a pun there, where do we actually find the time to be able to put these new things in place? And I'm definitely seeing with the teachers that I support is that they need time for the teacher to create or maybe find the resources to use with their students, and they're not managed to find or even create those. So there's just not time to do those. There's also no time to work out how to share those resources with the students. So what's the quickest way to get that information to the students, and how can they use that information quickly? And also there's not time to teach the students how to use the tools or to understand the feedback that's given throughout the tools. So there's different ways of sort of supporting a teacher with this particular time. And one way Quizlet have done it is by creating a GCSE resource centre. So what they've created is 10,000 sets for 24 different GCSE subjects. I know you're probably thinking, I don't teach GCSE, but if you do, you're lucky, you might find one on here. And the content is linked directly to those exam board specifications. So if you're teaching geography, there's going to be a whole range of different exam boards on there that you can have a look at. And it's been built by expert teachers. So someone that teaches that subject for that examination body, and they've created those resources for you, and they've also given you practice questions as well that you can use with your students straight away. You can also customize any of these as well. So if you see something that you like but you might want to add some more information to, or you might want to take some stuff away, you're free to customize those, and it's free to access. So you can use any of these. You don't need to go for any sort of premium account, and you can share it directly with your students through Satchel One as well. I'm just going to really quickly show you just what this looks like for the GCSE Resource Centre. So when you go into it, first of all, it opens up with this first page and gives you a whole range of GCSE subjects that you can select. I'm just going to select geography for this case. So I'm going to select on geography and scroll down, and then it's got a whole range of awarding bodies that I might be teaching. So let's say I'm teaching AQA geography. And as I scroll down again, I've got a few options. I've got my flashcards, which is how I can learn that material, but I'm going to show you the practice questions. So I'm going to click on practice questions, and I've got a range of folders all linked to that awarding body spec of different topic areas. Just going to pick the first one for this case, and I'm going to pick this first one here. So it's practice questions here. So there's 14 practice questions on natural hazard challenges in geography, and it's a multiple choice practice question that you can use straight away with your students, and they can then practice all that information and recall that information with them. So there's 14 questions right away that I can use. I could also put a limit here. If I only wanted to ask 10 of those, I could add that in. And if I wanted to share this, I just simply click the share button at the top, and then I've got share to Satchel One, which I'd click that button, log into my Satchel One, and I'd be able to share that with my class straight away, and they'd be able to take that practice question. It's the same case for any other Quizlet set that you could then use and share straight away. Great, that's everything. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you. That was fantastic. So, Darren, as a teacher, what have you found to be the most effective way of giving feedback in a classroom?
So I think the kind of most effective way, it depends on what they're doing. That kind of instant feedback works really well for quizzes, of course, really short, low stake quizzes. But if they're doing a bit more work, maybe they're doing an assignment base, it's actually giving them feedback on the scripts is the best way. So if you can pinpoint on their script while they're doing a draft, for instance, they've got an opportunity to try that out and make improvements to their draft that they've made, and hopefully get that ready for a summative assessment, for instance.
Yeah, great. How much difference do you think technology makes in being able to provide that instantaneous feedback that is so important for learners?
I think that's had a massive impact. If you've got 30 students in front of you, there's no way you can give instant feedback to everybody when they've finished a task. And I mean, if they finish the task all at the same time, it's a miracle sometimes. You know, you're going to get some people at different points, and people going ahead and some people a bit slower with those tasks. So actually technology solves that problem. It means that everybody who's doing that particular task will get that feedback when they finish it. And if we're looking back to that theory, it's about when they need it. It's timely for them. You know, it gives them that instant response, and they can see themselves and sort of reflect back. You know, what did I do wrong? Where could I improve? Just that spell example, you know, spelling is so crucial, and it's trying to get those right. It's getting that feedback straight away. So I think it's helped with that.
Yeah, definitely. You touched on the time pressures for teachers. How do you think that the pandemic has further impacted on teachers' workloads and their ability to kind of have a healthy work-life balance?
I think it's had a huge difference. Certainly all the teachers that I've supported, it's really difficult actually, certainly when we're teaching from home, to separate that. Sometimes you're teaching from the same living room that you then spend your evening in. So it's trying to have that switch off time. And also we've noticed certainly at the college is that students respond at different times throughout the day to, you know, send an email, and it's so quick just on a phone to quickly go, oh, I'll just respond to that email. You know, that student's struggling right now, I'm going to help them. And it's having that switch off time a little bit. But also it's that, what can I do more to support that students? And if they're struggling to get that feedback and they want it when they're doing that assignment, it does put the pressure on you as a teacher to be able to give that feedback to them and give your time to them to make sure that they can hear those.
Yeah, absolutely. So what positive, if any, do you think that schools have taken away from this period of closures? What's kind of the silver lining, if any?
I think there's quite a few actually. I think what we've done certainly in the education sector is we've really gone for online learning and technology. Before, I think people were just like, you know what, I'm happy with what we're doing. I can do it face to face. I'm going to stick with what I know, and what I know has worked and it's got results. And suddenly we've gone, okay, we can't actually see the students in the case of the first lockdown. This time round, you know, we can still see students, but I think we're now embracing in technology and going, I think this is going to stay, and we're seeing the benefits of technology rather than instantly going, no, that's different, I haven't got time to learn it. We've had to learn it really quickly, and I think we've made so many inroads in technology, and I think it's just now about sharing that practice with everybody else so that we can work out the best way to support our students going forward with whatever tool we've got wherever we are.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Darren, for being with us today. That was such a lovely start.
Thank you very much for having me.
Much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So, thanks again to Darren. Next up, we've got Peter Burgess from GCSE Pod, who's here to look at the rise of the micro lesson and whether it could be the key to successful catch-up learning. Hi, Peter.
Hello there, hi.
Hello, how are you?
Well, thank you very much.
Good, thank you for being here. Over to you.
Yeah, great. Let's get straight to it then. I shall flip over. We'll share our screen.
Fab.
Great. So yeah, as a strategy, so to try and pick up on what you will have been spoken about, we're going to look at sort of micro learning or a short 10-minute or short online lessons. Okay, so we're going to talking about duration here and accessibility, or more specifically, lack of duration and ultra accessibility. Okay, this term micro learning, really important term, but it's not been absorbed yet into the lexicon of primary and secondary educators that I know of. But even if you don't realize it, many, if not all of you, will have been experiencing what the e-learning industry calls micro learning for months now, ever since lockdown. Okay, I want you to picture yourselves. So think of yourselves learning during lockdown. You've all been learning to use new platforms. We've been training ourselves up on Zoom, haven't we? Teams, Satchel, Google Classroom, a whole host of other old and new systems to us. So what comes to our mind when we think of ourselves learning how to use these platforms? So just take a moment to picture that. So how have you learned to do this stuff? Okay, I'm going to come back to that. We're all on the pathway towards literacy in these platforms, and increasingly corporate video messaging platforms like Zoom, screen recorders. I've seen schools present on how they use visualizers. And reluctantly or otherwise, they've also had to consider assessment methods, platforms, and use of technology in how they deliver the remote learning, whether or not it's as live lessons. Okay, in our minds, looking at this problem of catch up, or the solutions to catch up, I suggest, or it's been suggested to me, that we associate catch up with the students and their lost learning. And I'm just going to draw our attention. It was my my fiance, my deputy head, who pointed out, actually, are we the ones that have been catching up? So both teachers, schools, and school leadership. And if so, how have we been catching up? And what can we learn from that in terms of how students can catch up, if you will? Okay, so you've been micro-learning. I've asked you to pitch yourselves learning. And some of the methods that you will have been using will have been tutorials, looms, short lessons, webinars, online chats, YouTube videos. Okay, you'll have been using all sorts of sort of quick, at the point of use lessons. Okay, so you'll we'll have done a series of webinars, no doubt, on different platforms, but have we taken full courses of learning? Is that picture in our mind of us taking a long series of lessons per se? And also, as part of that learning, how frustrated have we felt? We've all felt it when information has either not been readily available, so we've not been able to search for it and find it straight away, or when we have found it, it's been inaccessible, so it's been inefficient or ineffective, effectively. Okay, let's see, we picture ourselves learning. Let's see what I'm going to sort of set the picture here. This is, as a profession, this is what we've been up to. Okay, so we've been rehashing our curriculum reform. We've been wrestling with metacognition, the science of learning. We've been sequencing and interleaving. We've been reflecting on what we're learning, why we're learning it, the order we're learning it in. How do we ensure that we retrieve and apply information, and how long that should take, and how often we need to revisit it in order to cement our knowledge and skills? This is genuinely what we've all been doing. We've been learning the importance of using the right models and the right images to help shortcut and cement our learning as well. And in that context, how can this idea of sort of shorter online lessons fit with it and help us to support students of this catch-up project? Okay, so the lessons we can learn from micro-learning is about granularity. It's about breaking this down. So as teachers, we tend to think in days and in terms, or in lessons as our lowest sort of common denominator. But moving towards remote learning, it kind of invites us to look more at the sort of the lowest common denominator, so the finer grain stuff. Okay, so which sounds more palatable when we're learning? Is it a lesson or a micro lesson? This term micro lesson, it's been flying around in commerce now for a couple of years. I first came across it when I went down to an e-learning for commerce trade show down in London a couple of years ago, and it was all the rage. And we're always slightly behind in education, or we kind of, for safeguarding reasons mostly. But the idea here is that with micro-learning, specifically for sort of workers, is that they're less geared up to take a course of study, and they prefer instead to solve an immediate problem, which is what we've been doing as we've been micro-learning over the weeks and months, right? Okay, so the point is, we don't always want a full roast dinner. I don't want to take a full course on how to use Zoom. I just want to get on with it. And when I've got a problem, I need just a quick fix, okay? And then, so the point is here, how do we incorporate that idea into the courses that we're delivering, okay? There was a really powerful example that was given it was actually in ASCL, Association of School and College Leaders. They ran a blended learning webinar. They gave a really powerful example of a school that they saw lockdown coming before it landed, and they prepared all their staff. And then lockdown begins March 2020, and they went straight into audio only lessons. So they had safeguarding concerns. It was audio only lessons, and it was on a full unchanged timetable. But surprise, surprise, shortly after, due primarily to workload issues, they shortened the lessons. And that was just a response to having a far more, there were aspects of the online learning experience which were proving to be more time efficient. Okay, so they shortened them, allowed a little bit more time, assessment issues, etc. The question that we ask at that point is, are we hesitant? Why didn't they start with shortened lessons? How come, why did they have to work that out? And why was that part of a journey instead? Okay. We've got some lessons that we've learned at GCSE Pod about micro learning and about sort of trying to make that process and cut some of that process. Okay, so I like the image on the left here. You can try and squeeze too much in. It's actually super important, and I think it's the most difficult part of creating quicker, more efficient learning experiences, is knowing what to leave out. So you'll notice, for example, I left out, who's Peter? Is he a doctor? Is he a lay person? What experience does he have? I don't have time to deliver that. That would have been about, I recognize when I was trying to cut my presentation down, that was about my ego. I wanted to tell everybody how fantastic I was, but that was an obstruction to the learning, and I just wanted to get straight in. Okay, so a huge part, what can I leave out? I think one that it sounds like you shouldn't have to say it, but it's mega important. Second lesson, you got two pillars really at the heart of micro learning and all learning experiences really, but clarity and brevity. Again, can't emphasize enough. Don't labor the point. You don't have time. And the more we can achieve the clarity and brevity, quite often, again, the right story, the right image, that shortcuts that, doesn't it? And it drives home the learning whilst not having to deliver long lectures, etc. Okay. Lesson 3, an important one as well. As part of a course of learning or a learning journey, you're going to need an awful lot of learning. You'll all have recognized this. You need a lot of assets to support a really good, high quality learning journey, and to over a period of time. Okay. Now, each of those need to be. This is again coming back to that granularity of micro learning. We need to differentiate each component, and they need to be supporting the learner at the point at which they are in their journey. Okay, and in order to do so, and to make, importantly, to make it searchable, it needs to be accurately named. So you need to look at the nomenclature and the way that you're titling the different components of the learning that the students that you've lined up for them. Okay, on that, to expand further that point of nomenclature, and I'm going to appeal as well to some of the people who might be in tech as well and different roles. But the pace of change is getting very, very quick now. And so when we're creating assets, this is e-learning speak, when we're creating assets for our students and our learners, in order to make them future-proof, because that pace of change is so fast, you need to make sure that each of those individual components has excellent granularity, meaning it needs to have a very narrow focus on a single topic, and the nomenclature needs to be super precise. Okay, so picking the right name for your lesson and your tutorial or your mini lesson, it takes time and thought, but well worthwhile. For those of you who are in tech, attach the right metadata. So for example, when you're looking at building questions and assessments, etc., it's impossible to find. You might have the best learning component that you in the world, but without the right metadata and tagging, we can't find it. So your efforts in vain. It's still in the dark, right? So make it searchable. We talk about our generation being the indexers and curators of content, and I'd add to that metadata as well. Our lesson that we've learned, get it wrong, and you'll end up rebuilding it or coming back to it, or you'll go, why aren't people watching this amazing video that we've created? Why aren't the students engaging with this content? They just can't find it. Processing time versus radio silence. I've given you no processing time other than when I ask you to just think about an image about your learning. Okay. Video, animation, instruction, especially this applies to. Make sure that the technology that you're using at the very least has the ability to speed it up and slow it down. If you don't, you're going to lose a lot of learners. Some prefer it faster, some prefer it slower. I like to speed things up, and quite often I'll lose people for that reason. Some of them I'm aware of, but with e-learning, you can speed it up or slow it down. And for goodness sake, include subtitles. It's extra work, but make them searchable as well if possible. And I'd just sort of say, when you're selecting your resources, don't go for content that doesn't include the subtitles. They want to be using it on their phones. We've all browsed on Instagram and Facebook and watched videos on silent. Just it's the way things are going. Okay. Personality is a big one, and trust us on this one. So, for example, if we create a video and we use a very interesting voice, more often than not, we get more complaints about a mega interesting voice than we do about voices that are sort of middle of the ground. Your personality in any learning component can be a distraction, or it can generate passion and spark enthusiasm. So just be aware and conscious of that when you're choosing and selecting, so you can overuse an individual as well. Okay, again, these are some expensive lessons that we've learned, where we've recorded whole series and then realized actually this voice is not working for the students. Okay, there's a lot to learn. As a profession, we don't look outside very well. I think sometimes if we look at commerce or gaming or poker, for example, there's a huge amount to do. It's about making the right content available at the right time, making it searchable, and adding in other kind of tracking technologies, etc. All these things can be expanded, and we can put more meat on the bones for you. But I just wanted to make you aware. So largely the trend here is towards sort of trainer-driven traditional kind of concepts, and we're kind of coming over gradually. And you'll be able to see elements here. So where learning is becoming a bit more learner-driven within schools. Again, it's always going to be a little bit slower, but we talked about it being more efficient time-wise, and this kind of idea of it being just in time. So at the point of use. So I need to know this now. Where do I go? How do I search? And is it available? Is it quick? Is it relevant? Is it well differentiated, etc.? So lots of work to do on that, but glad to have pointed you in that direction. I think sometimes we're terrible at reflecting on our own learning experiences. If you think, we've had so many of them, and so many of these quick learning experiences, especially since lockdown, that's a shame not to just pause, reflect on that, and think, to what extent does the experience that I'm offering, or that we're offering our students, reflect that learning and support students in a very brief sort of experiences. And don't be afraid, be brave of offering something less than a traditional sort of lesson duration, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. That was great. So a couple of questions then. Your outlook on not calling it catch-up learning is quite interesting. So what would you call it instead?
It's just learning, isn't it? I don't know. I remember feeling quite angry when I first came across the term. I think we're all very concerned about mental health, but and I've seen other practitioners, you know, top heads and heads of academy chains that have taken this kind of line. And the idea that we're catching up or that we've lost something. For me, we've learned an enormous amount during lockdown, and there are so many lessons to make kids and students aware of. And I'm fascinated to see what this generation achieves, given that they've realized more explicitly and profoundly than any of us for decades, you know, the effect that government have on our lives. You know, to what extent are these rules there and available? So I won't get too political, but there are so many lessons that have been learned, and it's helping students to reflect on those. And there are so many great storytellers in schools and kind of both from a pastoral angle and a teaching and learning angle that are going to drive those lessons home, I hope.
Yeah, thanks. Would you mind just stopping your screen share for now, Peter?
I will.
Thank you. Fantastic, thank you. So do you think that in addition to supporting students' learning, that micro lessons could have the power to reduce teacher workload in schools as well?
Yeah, ultimately, like there's no way that even if you have sort of Russell Brand as a teacher and somebody massively eloquent and articulate who can really compress ideas into really sort of memorable phrases and ideas, even that, you know, when you're taking the volume of content that is asked of us, that we ask students to master as part of GCSEs, for example, that volume, as that most articulate teacher, you just can't get through it at pace, not enough. You know, it takes us, if you take sort of a 3-minute video that we produce and unpack it, you know, it takes us 16 weeks and 50 people to condense it down. It's a huge job to achieve that clarity and brevity that I mentioned.
Would you say that the rise in popularity of micro lessons is down to students shrinking concentration spans, or are shorter lessons just better suited to their learning style?
A combination of two things, haven't you? Technology now is able to deliver that, I think, much quicker. So you've got, in education, you always have to wait around whilst the devices become ubiquitous enough. We have learned during lockdown that actually, I think many schools have been surprised that devices haven't been ubiquitous enough. And that's been one of the key problems that they've had to solve at first. But I think a lot is down to that. And then, I mean, it's a huge one to open and discuss, and you can have a whole conference on it. I don't know whether it's sort of chicken and egg scenario, whether or not the devices and the technology have kind of taught us to concentrate for less time, or whether that's naturally part of us, and the devices reflect that. I couldn't say. I think you could argue it both ways.
Yeah.
Sorry to not give a straight answer.
No, that is fine. It's a big can of worms. We were told that £1 billion was being released for the government's catch-up learning fund. Do you think that that's enough?
I think what I'd like to see for schools is some ring-fence money. I think what happens is they release these large sums of money, which a lot can be achieved with. But I know the schools that many of the schools that we're working on, and the conversations I have with day to day, is they're fully aware that this is not a consistent fund that's ring fenced in any way. So it's one thing to have a magical pot that we're going to catch up. Is it enough? I think what I'd like to see is sort of a long-term commitment from the government to fund a ring-fenced amounts that give students and learners in this country what really our heritage demands, which is, you know, a world-class, world-leading platform and access to technology, because other countries are doing a bit better than us at the moment. And I know we've got a worldwide audience, but I'm obviously speaking from a UK perspective. In other countries, that's less so, isn't it? I think depends where the government is and what they're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for being with us today. It's been such a pleasure to meet you. Thank you
You're welcome.
so much and take care.
Thanks. All the best now. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye, Peter. So, thanks again. Next up, we have David Kavanagh from Ashton-on-Mersey, and he's going to be giving us a look into catch-up learning and distance learning policy. Hi. Hi, David.
Hello, how is that? You okay?
Yeah, I'm grand, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Yeah, good.
Good, lovely to have you with us. Over to you, just make a start when you're ready.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to share my screen. So you can just confirm you can see that, Hannah?
Yeah, we've got you. Thanks, David.
Yeah, home learning and catch up. Right, okay, so I'll just introduce myself to everybody first. My name is David Kavanagh. I'm the assistant head at Ashton-on-Mersey School here in Sale and in Manchester. It's a large mixed ability school, mixed intake, and it's a secondary modern and mainly grammar school area of about 1,500 pupils. And as I said, I'm the assistant head and I'm mainly in charge of teaching and learning curriculum and also behaviour at Key Stage 3, so quite a large remit. I'm going to talk this afternoon about home learning and catch up. Now, putting this together, I wanted to really just share with people the journey that we came on along, and also using the Satchel platform to help us along the way, really. So on the 20th of March, everybody, and I'm assuming I'm speaking to mainly people in education, we had to pivot and change quite quickly, really, didn't we? And at the centre of what we needed to provide was the need of the pupils. But we had a lot of other considerations, like the expectation of parents who all overnight became quite demanding of what they called Zoom lessons. Staff expectation, of course, of what they were expected to do. The advice that we got from unions and the government and the policies that we had in place. Peer pressure from other schools and what they were doing, what they weren't doing. Things on Twitter, for example, from someone like Lord Adonis. And also we had to think about our staff as well. And we decided that at that point that we really needed to take stock. We were helped out by the timing of it, I suppose, in some ways, because it was just a week before the Easter holidays. So we decided to do an initial response and really consolidate on that. And then expand, try and make things a little bit more interactive. Survey at regular points to see how we were doing, so staff and parents and pupils. Reflect on that and then plan ahead for the future for some sort of contingency and catch up. So our first sort of initial response was by setting up some classroom areas on Google, so using Google Classroom, and really made sure that any of our disadvantaged pupils, we've got about 20% of our cohort here, are disadvantaged. So we, which is not up high in comparison to other areas, but we made sure that they had the right technology available. We've done a technology survey using Satchel's Pulse surveying tool via Show My Homework. We were in an advantageous position because we've been using Google Classroom and G Suite here for about 7 or 8 years, so our staff are really well versed on doing this. And we set up a classroom area for each subject. The problem with Google Classroom areas is that they become a bit of a dumping ground where staff upload things. It gets very messy very quickly. It's very difficult for pupils and parents to navigate it. So it was only a stopgap. Then we went into our phase 1, which we really consolidated what we were doing. And this is where the Satchel platform came in, along with Google Classroom, and obviously part of the Satchel platform being Show My Homework, which we've been using here now for about 3 years. I instructed staff to make sure they put daily lesson activities up onto Show My Homework. They had to be following the timetable, so if the pupils had English, Maths, Science on that day, they should have the English, Maths, Science lessons popping up for the right time. They were in context and sequence. We gave week-long deadlines. The flexible task that Satchel introduced a few weeks into lockdown was really useful, as well as the classroom, as well as the classwork function as well. And we also used the assessment via Show My Homework, using the Messenger and also Google Classroom template. So the great thing about the platform is that it interfaces really well with Google Classroom, so it's really easy to use together. And quite quickly we were up and running, and we had about 1,200 lesson activities pushed out each week. And by the end of lockdown by July, that would total to about 20,000 different lesson activities that we'd sent out. And I think someone from Satchel said we were one of the largest traffic sort of schools in the country on that, which was like, we were quite proud of that, I suppose. We also were able to, via the messenger on Show My Homework, check in as a bit of a welfare check. Form tutors were able to do that, and also organise some calls as well. Then one of the problems about this consolidation phase, I suppose, is that actually it's very one-dimensional, and it's just pupils working at home on their own. And we knew we had to increase our interactivity, if you like. So our second phase was introducing some podcasting using Screencastify. But what was really important about this stage is that we established a pupil and parent and teacher sort of relationship, albeit a remote one. The analytics tools on Show My Homework were really, really useful. The reporting thing that we were doing, I was doing daily reports at the start to see who was engaging and not. And then we were able to communicate really easily. So we then expanded our offer. We dipped our toe into a bit more sort of interactive content. We use a Screencastify on our Google console, and we trained staff into creating these podcast lessons. And it was actually a good way of introducing staff to delivering content via a bit of a new technology. And in our minds, we wanted then to push them towards using video conferencing, Google Meets or Zooms or Teams or whatever. It was really easy linked to Show My Homework. That's one of the best things about the platform. The interface is so easy to use. We were starting to introduce pastoral sessions such as assemblies, and also we can save these for revision purposes, some of these lessons in the future. And it meant that by about the end of April, so about a month into the lockdown period, we were able to move to more interactive lessons, so using Google Meet and Google Livestream. By this time, we put a policy into place. That was really important. We trained staff, which is also, of course, very important as well. And we'd invested in the G Suite Enterprise for Education upgrade, which allows you to use Google Meet and Google Livestream to deliver lessons. It's really secure. They've got enhanced teacher controls. You can have up to about 250 participants. The auto records to your Google Drive, subtitle options, a background blur for security. Interesting features like whiteboard jams, like a little interactive whiteboard feature on there, and a question and answer part as well, which is really useful. Google Livestream is slightly different. It's very much live streaming. There's no interaction as such. It really controls behaviour. You can have 100,000 viewers. Not that we would get that for some of my history and geography lessons, of course. And also has a subtitles option as well. But it meant that we could deliver to large groups of students, so it gave us that flexibility. But we then, because it easily interfaces with the Satchel platform, we were pushing all of our Google Meet links out via Show My Homework, fully viewed by the pupils, of course, and also by the parents as well, which is really important. We were then able to, so this is just an example of a timetable we were producing. This will be pushed out each week, again via announcements on Satchel, and also via the head's newsletter. It looks quite simple, that, but actually behind that, we were able to differentiate, and we were offering this amount of lessons per week, about 70 Google Meets or live streams. And you can see there in brackets some of the uptake and engagement numbers we had for some of these sessions. For example, in each year group, we have about 260 pupils. So there was some good engagement there in some of our lessons. Again, using the Satchel platform allowed us to push these out, advertise them well, get parents on board and get that engagement up. And what we were also able to do was also see who was logging onto the platform using the analytics tools, like the insights on Show My Homework, to see who had logged on, when they'd logged on, who clicked on the resource, and they were able to get form tutors to follow up if someone hadn't been on for 2 days consecutive. So actually the impact was really, I was surprised at the start. You can see there the 13th of April, we were up at 95% of the school population logging on every single day and actually looking at tasks and spending a bit of time on them. And we dropped, you can see down the middle here, we were dropped down to about 86, mid-80s. But you can see actually when we introduced new things, so you can see here, this is when we started. We introduced podcasting around about here, it levels off, and we introduced our live lessons on Google Meet and Livestream here, and you can see a steady increase. But overall average of 91.9%. It did have its downsides though. I was the main sort of contact for like renewing passwords and things like that. And this was my daily sort of scene in my kitchen and I sent this out to the pupils on Show My Homework saying, Mr. Kavanagh says, please remember your Show My Homework password. They were doing my head in like by the end, but it shows that they were keen, I suppose. The great thing about the analytics tools is that you can see how many pupils are disengaged per week. So this is a number there. You know, we average about 75. So, you know, we have to chase them up every time, but it was great to do through the analytics tool. We could look at that in terms of year group. So really easy to do that and filter out for the year group. And also some of the main target groups we have in school, like the GCSE group in year 10, our pupil premium cohort and the SEND cohort as well. And again, we could then get our TAs to phone up the SEND pupils, our learning mentors to phone up the PP pupils, and subject teachers to phone GCSE pupils as well. So it was about that constant sort of like never letting it go, that relentless approach to it. But the analytics tools on the reporting on Show My Homework allowed us and gives us the information to do that. We then did some parental feedback and staff feedback through Pulse, and used some Google Forms for that as well. And you know, we were kindly asked to as a case study for Satchel, and we featured on the website and also featured in the Teaching Times as well, which we were really pleased about. That leads us into our catch up, and actually the work that we did throughout lockdown has actually fed into our catch up strategy, which we've called Catch Up 21. We wanted to not mention anything to do with COVID at all because it's quite a negative word that we thought. So it's called Catch Up 21, because the year 2021 next year didn't really get into my literary sort of sensibilities. It would have been great if it was a year later. It would have been Catch Up 22, and there would have been a nice play on words there. But there you go. So we've got a contingency strategy in place, but Show My Homework, Satchel, features really heavily in that, as you can see from the first line. For example, pupils who have to self-isolate, and at the moment we've got a large group of year 8s out of school. We've got a really large group of year 11s, about 125 year 11s out of school at the moment, self-isolating because of 3 separate cases. But because it's such a flexible platform, we now can offer a blended approach. And what that means is we still invite pupils into lessons. So we're teaching a class of maybe a diminished number of maybe 10 or 11 pupils, but we've got 4 or 5 at home. They come in via Google Meet, but it's all pushed out via Show My Homework. We can still offer in context and in sequence work. We've got nominated subject reps for each year group, and this is and these classrooms that we've created. For example, you can see there year 7 home learning, year 9 home learning, 8 and 10 and 11, and we also use the sixth form. These subject reps upload the work on a regular basis to these. It means that as soon as the pupil has to self-isolate, they've got regular in context, in sequence work, and also invited to the Google Meets as this blended approach in lessons as well. So it's a really flexible and useful tool to be able to create your own classes on them. And as I said, we add pupils to them every day, and we take them off every day as they are isolating or not. We've got this money from the government, the overall catch-up package, as every school has. We identified through our Catch Up 21 that we'd have about £108,000 to spend, plus around about £230,000 of disadvantaged money. So we've got a big bit of money to spend, and the process of assessing what we need and identifying needs and putting strategies in place. Actually, we're using Satchel to facilitate that a lot. This is our Catch Up 21, for example, a strategy for year 11. We're running 3 different types of provision, so face-to-face after school, an extra lesson. We use remote learning using Google Meet or live stream, again, pushed out via Show My Homework and the pre-recorded podcasts. And we're able to offer this quite a flexible approach for all pupils in year 11 across a 2-week timetable that you can see there. And Satchel's really helped, as I said, facilitate that, because we were able to identify who didn't really engage in home learning and really focus on them for the face-to-face sessions, for example. We were able to do another access to technology survey via Pulse. We did a load of diagnostic assessments in the first week back at term, but we did them all using self-marking quizzes, helps out with staff workload, but also really pinpoints the knowledge that they're missing. We host virtual catch-up sessions on Show My Homework via Google. We push out support materials and also some of the podcast courses. And that we're going to push out, and they're going to roll out in January. So a really flexible approach to catch up, actually something that if we didn't have the Satchel One platform, I don't think we will be able to do. So yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing now, and I'll take any questions if anybody's got any. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, David. That is fab. So, do you have any teacher survival tips for working through the reopenings and self-isolations? It takes its toll. What would be kind of your suggestion for survival tips?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, you know, I'm obviously speaking to educators out there, and yeah, you know, we're all exhausted. But I would say if you've got, you know, the Satchel platform and you're thinking of how to, you know, run your, you know, your catch up, or also your isolating pupils, the provision for them. The first is set up these areas. They've been really useful because they're very clear and very simple. And actually get those subject reps appointed. It makes staff a bit accountable. So there's one member of staff for maths in year 8, for example, one for year 9. Get some admin support. Our attendance officer updates the classroom areas on Satchel every single day. Excuse me. And get a pre-prepared letter. Have a real clear process. Use the seating plans. I didn't mention them, but they're really useful on the seating plans online. For identifying who's in a 2-meter radius, so we don't have to send whole classes home or whole year groups home, and add them to that class area. Have work ready to go. You can trigger it really easily by just changing a date on the task. So it means that as soon as we send a group of pupils home to self-isolate, as soon as, you know, within hours, they've got tasks for the week, links to Google Meets, and all the information that they need.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us, David. That was so
good. No problem.
Especially because you're so passionate about your role. That is so lovely. So thank you for being with us. And
no problem. Thanks very much for the invite. I'll leave now. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much to David for sharing his experience with us. So finally, we're moving on to Satchel classes, where Louise Raw is going to be talking to us about making extra learning and work experience more accessible for underprivileged students. Hello, Louise.
Hi there, nice to see you.
Hi, Louise. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Good, I'm good, thank you. Yes, over to you whenever you're ready.
Great, I should be sharing my screen now.
Yeah.
Perfect. So hi everybody, lovely to see you all today. So in this quick talk to wrap up, I'm going to be briefly talking to you about another area of catch-up learning, which we also need to focus on just as much as curriculum learning, and that's work experience. So on one hand, we probably should feel really primed to be able to reach more students than we ever have before. 2020 has obviously seen remote learning really take off, and I'm sure you'll have noticed the mass movement of parents moving online and really getting used to those traditional learning or tutoring now taking place online, which has been great to see. But it's not that simple, because on the flip side, we've also seen that 3/5 of employers have actually cancelled work experience for students in 2020 due to the pandemic. And redundancies have unfortunately doubled over this time as well. So on the surface, it can look a little bit scary for students right now who are entering the world of work. So just moving on here. In this quick talk, we're going to be covering, so what is the impact of the global pandemic on work experience, and how has this impacted schools as well? We're going to be looking at the Gatsby benchmarks for work experience and how technology can help with some of those benchmarks. And then lastly, we're looking at a new free resource that can help some students to broaden their horizons. So if we look at the situation in schools for students right now, the quality, the advice, and the breadth of knowledge out there about different industries, it just feels like a bit of a lottery for students at the moment. And that's not to say that students aren't getting good careers guidance in schools. It's just that it's really not a level playing field, even at the best of times. And the current situation has only added to that. So we're going to look at a few of the things that can really impact careers guidance. And the first one is looking at careers departments in schools, where often there's wonderfully knowledgeable and experienced careers leaders. They've got good knowledge of the modern labour market, and they'll have careers programmes in place that really support students and help them to ask the right questions about themselves, about their skill set and what they want in their future, to help get them thinking along the right path. But that's, again, not the case for everyone. And granted, this is going back some time now, but I always remember my own experience with my careers department in school. And I filled in a survey. I probably said something like I didn't want to wear a uniform, or I liked the outdoors. And I was told that I should be a grave digger, which I wasn't so keen about. And that kind of stark black and white, it seems alarmingly similar to the government's recent Rethink, Reboot, Retrain programme for the arts, where some assumptions are made about what students might want to do in the future. And my point here is really that advice given at this young age, when students are impressionable, is quite crucial. And for so many, they won't really know that they consider things outside of the A-level subjects that they're actually studying, or how they can transfer their skills, let alone just all of the weird and wonderful jobs that there are out there that they could get involved with. So we've covered the school's careers department, but there's also a few other areas as well that can give students really different experiences. So some schools will have stronger connections with local businesses, so they can really support with the work placement. And ordinarily students, whether that's arranged by themselves or by their careers department, could go to some bigger organisations. They can move around departments and they can start to get a real taste for different operations within a business. And I think if this is done right, it can be a great way actually to just rule out certain types of work and decide that that's not the one for them. But equally, it can start to open up students' eyes into roles that they can do with their skill set, even if it's got nothing to do with their A-levels that they're studying. But this experience is something that is really difficult to be replicated for every student, as obviously businesses can only support a limited number of students. So that experience really, really dramatically differs from child to child, and it's impossible for them to all experience a similar thing. If you also then cut off the physical placements that we've seen from 3/5 of work experience being cancelled, it can suddenly feel as though there are very limited connections to lean on there right now. And then, of course, you've got the geography of schools. So some will be in inner cities or large towns, where access to placements across more industries is just easier to manage. So the breadth of choice for a student in London or in Manchester will be very different to one in the countryside. And transport links aside, it's just the sheer volume of businesses that they can access is really unparalleled in bigger cities. Once again, creating a divide for work experience opportunities and putting some students at more of a disadvantage. And the pandemic with lockdown has only exacerbated that situation as well. When it also comes to parental input, some parents generally have good knowledge of how skills can be transferred, or they might have more of an idea about the modern career paths that can be taken, but it's really not always the case. And data from the OECD shows that students are highly influenced by their parents and by their own socioeconomic background. So it leaves students with limited aspirations. On the other hand, we know that some students will be very fortunate to know what they want to do from a young age, and it might be following in the footsteps of their parents. So if they have two doctors as parents, then they'll receive the best advice from the frontline. They could get extra tutoring in the subjects that they know they need to excel in. They'll have a clear path and they do it from the age that they need to do it from, so they're never going to slip up. And that's such a fortunate position to be in, but not every child is. With the rate of redundancies as well at the moment, and arts funding being cut, that could also further damage students' aspirations in some areas that they feel is maybe not a good area to want to pursue right now. And then lastly, some students will be fortunate enough to come from wealthier backgrounds, and that unlocks a lot more possibilities. So they can travel further afield. They might have a family member with a spare room in a bigger city, or even post-school, they might be able to fund themselves to rent a room and carry out an unpaid apprenticeship, which in many industries is the only route in. So yeah, it's a really, really big lottery, and socioeconomic factors do continue to make things harder for more disadvantaged students. So couple all of that with the fact that schools are also expected to show evidence of Gatsby benchmarks for work experience. There's a lot for both students and schools to contend with right now. So these benchmarks were introduced by the Department for Education, and schools are expected to show evidence for the 8 benchmarks by the end of 2020. I'm not going to read them out, but you can see even with a good careers programme, with transport links, with supportive family members, it's still very difficult to give every student in school a really personalised careers programme and link it to their curriculum learning and make it personal to them. So this got us thinking, because we are working with 1 million students and we're really excited about the future and how we can potentially personalise careers guidance, linking it to what students are studying, to the homework that they've actually been set. So we've been exploring if technology and innovation could support schools at scale with some of these benchmarks in an area that's becoming increasingly urgent to address the longer that we leave it. So yeah, we wanted to see if we can start provide encounters with employers and real access in the labour market for students. So what we have been up to is during lockdown, we saw a bit of a need for providing additional face-to-face learning opportunities, knowing that not all students will have had this over lockdown. So we created Satchel classes and launched this summer, providing support in 3 areas. That's curriculum support, life skills, and careers guidance. So for the curriculum side, we provide low cost and free short burst lessons, and they cover a topic at a time. So students who might not traditionally be able to afford tutoring suddenly have the option for a couple of pounds a class or for free to access that additional learning. And as we were developing this, we thought that there was another opportunity to help even more students with their skills. So we also developed a series of classes that cover life skills. So it might be around confidence or assertiveness, choosing what to do in the future, all the way through to how to be a better speaker, how to stop mumbling, how to present. And these skills are often things that we know are taught indirectly in the classroom. And they may take place in a quick one-to-one chat with the teacher after a lesson. It may take place during verbal feedback or in those classroom moments when there's lots of encouragement from peers and it's a real confidence boost. And although a lot of students might have had video lessons over lockdown, we know that face-to-face time with teachers has definitely been missing. And it's these soft skills as well that we think are an important area of catch-up that we can help with. And then what this talk is about more so was the work experience side. So with it being halted for the foreseeable for safety reasons, and with the traditional issues that we've had with work experience that I outlined earlier, this was an area that we thought we could really support students in. So as a starting point, we've been working with professionals from across the country, and they've been providing live workshops where students get the chance to explore a potential future career with someone who's working in it every single day. So we're giving the students the chance to ask questions. They get a live Q&A, and they can really get a sense of the demands of the role. They get an honest account from the professional where they run through their responsibilities, how stressful an environment it is, if they can get a work-life balance, their pay, everything. And the students can start to see if it's something that they'd like to pursue, if it's something that their personality actually fits in with, and really what's required of them. But really importantly as well, it means from a young age, they're starting to get a sense of what subjects they might need to start thinking about taking if that's an industry that they want to go into. But we also really encourage the notion that it's never too late and you can always get into a new career. And we've got lots of examples of professionals who have made a huge career change and exactly how they did it to encourage students who might have already chosen their A-levels. So we launched this summer, and we've had classes, really traditional classes, so career as a police officer, becoming a doctor, a career in journalism, for example. And we've had a lot more as well on the more modern side, so in TV and film producing and special effects, becoming a project manager. All of these workshops that we're running are free, and we wanted to let you know about them because this is a resource as well that is available for you to use in your school. We rotate what's on offer each week, and we're adding new classes all the time. So this is currently available to parents as well, and there's a link to it in the parent Satchel One app. But it's also all available on satchelclasses.com. So our aim with all of this is just to democratize access to additional learning and really broaden horizons for students. So in the past, we've also had first-hand support from UCAS, psychologists, life coaches. We've got talks with universities, with professionals up and down the country at no cost. So not only do we hope to support the most underprivileged students, but also schools with those Gatsby benchmarks. So that's actually it from me today. If you've got any questions, my email address is there on the screen. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Have you got time for a couple of questions?
Yes, of course.
So you touched briefly on the government's Rethink, Retrain, Reboot campaign. How important do you think that it is for aspiring art students to see working artists in a society that's seemingly so desperate for them to get a job in tech or finance? What do you think?
Yeah, that's something I do feel really saddens me at the moment, how many people there are who are very qualified in the arts and they're having to think about retraining. I think every student's good at something, and as educators you'll all know this better than me, but it would be boring if we were all the same, and every student does have something special in them. I think increasingly we're seeing new creative careers coming up all the time that stem from design, IT, DT, it might be in playwriting, poetry, and not so much the traditional core subjects. It does feel like we've come a really long way, but with COVID and funding being cut, it feels like a really cruel time right now, especially as everybody during lockdown seems to have turned to the creative world to get through it.
Yeah.
So whether it's taking up a new hobby, painting, reading, really getting into cinema, going to live comedy gigs that are taking place in someone's living room. And that part feels really sad. I think it's a tough time for kids who would want to pursue a career in the arts when there aren't any jobs available. And we should try and support them because it plays such a huge role, not just socially and culturally, but economically as well. A colleague of mine told me a quote earlier today saying Winston Churchill, when he was asked to cut arts funding to help with war efforts, said, then what are we fighting for? So yeah, I think it's incredibly important for art students that they do see working artists. Everybody needs a role model.
Yeah. Louise, would you mind just unsharing your screen, please?
Sure.
Thank you. You mentioned just the Gatsby benchmarks, that's quite new to me. You mentioned that two of them are encounters with employers and employees and experience of workplaces. How do you think that they are going to hit the benchmarks when access to workplace just isn't possible?
I think it will be difficult, but in some ways I'm less concerned about this areas because schools have always found a way to stay agile and think on their feet. And really, with everything that they've had to put up with in the pandemic, keeping key workers' children cared for and being on the front line, I think they're going to be able to adapt in the same way with work experience. And I suspect what we'll start to see is just more opportunities online, just like we've discussed. So one of the positives of all of this is that we're working remotely right now, and the future is probably going to be a little bit more remote. So it could also be seen as a really good time for students to get experience working for a company remotely, where they're going to have different disciplines. They're going to have to be self-motivated. They're going to have to be better communicators and more organized in general without somebody holding their hand the whole time. So these skills actually might really set them up well for the future. So yeah, I hope in some ways that carries on, and also that it does help to level the playing field a little bit for students who otherwise wouldn't be able to work for those companies. So hopefully we can see a positive in it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Louise and Satchel classes, for your time this afternoon. It's been so lovely to have you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bye. So that is all we've got time for, I'm afraid. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our guests for coming on and sharing their expertise with us today. It's been so good to hear from industry voices and frontline teachers about this issue, and there's been some really good suggestions on how we can tackle it. If you tuned in late today, or you missed a speaker that you really wanted to see, or you want to share the webinar with colleagues, please don't worry, it's been recorded and we'll be sending it to you via an email, and it will be with our free webinar resource pack. We'll also be sending out some information to you on our exclusive catch-up learning bundle offer, so keep an eye out for that as well. If you're yet to sign up, you can do so via the link in the description below. And all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this live talk has been really useful for you, and we just wish you all the very best for this academic year. So from all of us here at Satchel, goodbye and take care. Thanks for being with us today.